This week's Parsha of Shelach discusses the Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies, in which Moshe sent 12 of the Jewish people's finest leaders to report on what lies ahead for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And as we know, the spies returned with massive fruit from the land. They delivered this negative report, and it's following that negative report and all the subsequent reactions and the loss of faith of the people that the Torah tells us, Vayipol Moshe v'Aaron al pneim lifnei kol kaladat Hashem, that Moshe and Aaron, they fall on their faces in front of the entire people. V'Yoshua ben Nun v'Kalev ben Yefuneh min hatarim et haaretz kir'u bigdehem, that it's Yehoshua and that it's Kalev, who are among this group of spies that toured Israel, that they too tore their clothing. And it's following that the Torah tells us that Yoshua and Kalev, in that moment, they shout out to the people the famous words, Tova ha'aretz me'od me'od, that the land is incredibly good, that we have nothing to be afraid about. But what's fascinating is that when God dispenses punishment out for the actions of the spies, he in fact highlights the fact that Yoshua and Kalev would be spared, and that they themselves would not die like the rest of the other spies. But what makes this particularly strange is the fact that the Torah actually already made it clear that Yoshua and Kalev were excluded from the punishment of these other spies. And so why is it that Hashem and the Torah re-emphasizes that they were exempt from punishment? It's obvious. Kalev and Yoshua, they didn't do anything wrong. And so Rashi quotes the Gemara in Bava Basra and explains that the Torah tells us again that Yoshua and Kalev were spared because the reward for their service would be that the Olam Haba, that the afterlife which would have been prepared for the other scouts, would now be transferred actually to them. In other words, the Torah is re-emphasizing their exemption from consequences because not only did they not receive punishment, but they in fact were rewarded as well. And while this certainly has become the most accepted shot and explanation for these troubling verses, I want to share with you a radical reinterpretation by the Netziv. The Netziv writes that there were really two sins that the group of spies committed. You see, first, they spoke bad about the land. But secondly, they went and they misled the Jewish people. And when we think about Yehoshua and Kalev, there is no doubt that they were not guilty of speaking bad about the land. The Torah tells us this fact quite explicitly. But the fact is, according to the Netziv, that Yehoshua and Kalev, they did sin and that they, just like the rest of the spies, misled the people. And we see that God spares them, as the Torah tells them that Yehoshua and Kalev chayu min ha'anashim ahem, that they lived despite the fate of these other men. But the hard reality, according to the Netziv, is that Yehoshua and Kalev also should have died for misleading the people. But it's God in his infinite mercy who simply chooses not to punish them because in fact they actually did something good as well. And if you think about this for a moment, this is a wild idea that Yehoshua and Kalev sinned in some way, that they too were possibly deserving of punishment like the other spies. How could that be possible? What could in heaven's name be so bad about what they did? In fact, they seem to have done everything in their power to prevent these tragic events from unfolding. How could we even begin to understand this suggestion made by the Netziv? And so perhaps it's not what Yehoshua and Kalev did do, but rather what they did not do, or more specifically, what they did not say. Yes, Yehoshua and Kalev showed great heroism and courage. But by the time they stepped up to the plate, by the time they said something to try to make a difference, at that point it was simply too late. The Jewish people, they already made up their minds. They missed their chance, and their silence, the silence of Kalev and Yehoshua, was deafening. And it's this initial silence that screams out to us about the importance of not sitting back and waiting idly to get involved and to make a difference. As the sign on the subway in New York City reads, if you see something, say something. You see, when we as a people and as a community, when we see something bad that's happening, it's our responsibility to say something. And despite the fact that Yehoshua and Kalev were spared, the Torah still lists them as being members of the group. They are anashim, the men that toured the land. Being a true hero is not just about what we do or what we say. It's also about when we do it. We too cannot wait around to say something or to take a stand on an important issue that affects us, our families, our community, our people, or our country. We need to learn from our Parsha never to remain silent when we can help, when we can make a difference and we can bring about positive change. Now, don't get me wrong. It's okay to be the strong and silent type. It's okay to choose your battles. It's okay. That is, until it isn't. It's okay until those moments demand of us to take our voices and use them strongly and loudly. And it's not hard to look around the world or our country or even our community for causes that are so important that need our voices. It can be overwhelming living in a world where there's so much to do. But the truth is that each and every one of us has within us this great power. And with it comes a great responsibility as well. The Rambam teaches that each and every one of us needs to see ourselves, our community, and in fact the entire world as being in perfect balance. And when you see things through that lens, you realize that your next holy thought or word or action, it can literally tip the scales and bring redemption to oneself and to all of creation. That's our duty as Jews. And so may we each learn this lesson from our Parsha and from the story of the spies, that unlike the spies that use their voices for evil, let us use them for good. And let us do what Yehoshua and Kalev could not do, which is changing the perspectives of those around us for the better as we make our world a better place. And so Orit and Shaya and Nava and Noam, they all join me in wishing you and your family a Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful and a restful Shabbat.